Okay, what are we doing today? Let's see what our schedule tells us. So this is the 14th, Valentine's Day, right? So today, if you have a crush on anyone, let them know. Okay, so I can't remember, did we finish chapter 3? Well, I didn't write it down. I think. We finished it? Okay, thanks. Good. So we had an exam last week. I have the graded exams. They're in my office. I'll get them and at break time. And if you want them back, you can have them. If not, I'll recycle them. So we're going to move on to chapter 4, tissues. So we learned about atoms and molecules and cells. Now we're going up one level to tissues. And then after this chapter, then we'll get into the organ system. So chapter 5 is the integumentary system, which is skin, and then we'll do bones, and then muscles, and then nervous system. Wait a minute.
Will chapter 3 be on test
2? So the chapter, the exam number 1, we made that only chapter 1 and 2, right? Because we were a little behind schedule. Yeah, so exam number 2, yeah, so that'll be 3 days. That will change to 1 and 2. So yeah, exam number 2 will include chapter 3. Yeah. Okay. Okay. I probably said this last week, but another reminder about the open tutoring sessions for biology in room 133, the general biology lab across the hall. Several times a week, there will be a biology instructor in there for anybody taking any biology course. Anatomy, physiology, general biology, microbiology, you can come in there. Doesn't have to be your instructor. Just any one of those times you can go in. Any one of us can help with any of those courses. Mine is 3 to 5 Monday. I think there's some. I sent out an announcement about that, didn't I? So with the schedule, tells you which hours. I think it's every day. There's at least 1 or 2 hours. So if you think that might help you, especially when there's an exam, like the week before an exam, it might be helpful to you do that. I gave an exam in my Monday night class this week, and 2 students in that class came from 3 to 5, and I helped them prepare for that exam, and they both did really well on it. Okay, where are we? Chapter 4. Tissues. So we'll look at this PowerPoint for a while, and then I got a worksheet, and I'm gonna, I guess for lab, I'll set up some. There are some kinds of tissues you need to be able to identify under a microscope. Not all of them, but some of the more obvious and important ones. Like, for example, surely you should be able to, if you see a blood smear under a microscope, you should know that that's what that is. It's not muscle tissue or bone tissue, that's blood. So I'll set up some of those later. Okay, tissue, the material and organism, materials that make up an organism. And every tissue, every type of tissue is made up of living cells and also some non-living stuff. Um, we'll see what that means. So this science of histology means the study of tissues. So the histologist is someone who studies tissues, and many histologists are I can't think of the word. What is it? What's pathologists? Yeah, pathologists. Pathology is a study of diseases, and pathologists are the specialist who works in a lab, and anytime any tissue is removed in a surgery at a hospital, they don't just throw that in the trash. That has to go to a pathologist, and he will examine it and see what was wrong with it, make sure it actually was cancerous, if that was the reason for removing it, or if it was, or if you have a biopsy done, some tissue to see if the tumor is benign or malignant, so cancerous or not, that goes to a pathologist. They can look at tissues under a microscope and see if they're normal or not. So there are many types of tissues, as we'll see, but they all fit into, or each one fits into one of these four categories: epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous. We'll define each of those more, but muscle tissue, of course, this is the kind that can contract, get shorter, and produce pulling force. Nervous tissue, you know about that. That's for conducting nerve impulses. Different parts of the body communicate that way. But epithelial and connective, there's many types of epithelial and many types of connective. Epithelial is tissue that's in sheets, thin sheets, like skin is an epithelial tissue, and the linings of hollow organs are epithelial tissues. Most organs have some kind of covering, like a skin over the organ, that would be epithelial. And connective tissue, that includes a lot of different tissues. That includes bone tissue and cartilage and fat tissue, and even blood is considered to be a connective tissue. The name connective tissue, it implies that it connects things together, or it holds your body together. And some of them do that, but blood doesn't really do that. I don't know why it's considered a connective tissue. Okay, just a diagram showing just examples of some of the tissues in these different categories. Where's this word membrane? So thin layer or sheet of cells that either covers an organ or lines an organ, and so most membranes are made up of epithelial tissue, but some of them also have connective tissue along with the epithelial tissue. And we saw some membranes in chapter 1, the pleura that surround the lungs, the pericardium that surrounds the heart, the peritoneum that surrounds the abdominopelvic cavity. Those are all membranes that are made up of epithelial and connective tissue. So those are called the serous membranes, the ones that have a parietal outer layer and a visceral inner layer, so it's a double membrane. We learned about that. These mucous membranes, these are membranes that produce mucus. They have special cells in them called goblet cells. Goblet cells are cells that produce mucus. So we have mucous membranes lining our whole respiratory system is lined with mucous membranes, all the way from your nasal cavity through your trachea, the bronchi that lead into the lungs. Most of the digestive system is lined with mucous membranes. So mucus just keeps surfaces moist. And then cutaneous membrane, the word cutaneous means skin. So the skin is mostly epithelial tissue, but in the lower layers of the skin, there's some collagen fibers, protein fibers running through it. So that would be that would make it a connective tissue as well. And then synovial membranes. These are the ones that surround joints. So most of the movable joints of your body, elbows, shoulders, finger joints, knees, ankles, each one has a joint capsule surrounding that contains lubricating fluid called the synovial fluid. And these capsules are lined by these synovial membranes that make that fluid. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we do the skeletal system, or there's a chapter on joints that we'll look at briefly. So this diagram showing some of these membranes. Okay, epithelial tissues, that first category. So these are typically thin layers of tissue that cover surfaces, cover the whole body, and cover organs or line the hollow spaces inside of organs, and hollow tubes and glands. We'll see that glands are made up of a special type of epithelial tissue. And these epithelial tissues are typically made up of a bunch of cells in layers, layers of cells. In some cases, just one layer of cells, but there could be several layers of cells. But beneath that layer of cells, there's some non-living stuff called the basement membrane. Basement because it's at the bottom, below the layers of cells. And that's basement membrane is made up of usually collagen fibers, protein fibers, or maybe along with some other kind of protein fibers. And that basement membrane gives strength to the tissue. Well, so here's a diagram. So these are all cells, a layer of cells, and then this would be the basement membrane below it. It says epithelial tissues typically avascular. The prefix A means not, vascular means blood vessels. So epithelial tissues, they're very thin. They usually don't have blood vessels running through them, but they do have blood vessels very close to them, like right below the epithelial tissue, because every cell, even the ones that make up these epithelial tissues, have to have oxygen and nutrients delivered to them, so they have to have blood vessels very close to them. replace themselves frequently. Because these are layers of tissue that are on the surface of something or on your surface of your skin, those skin cells are always rubbing off the epithelia that line your digestive system. They've always got foods going through them, so that um, brushes off some of the cells of that tissue. So um, the epithelial cells are dividing all the time to replace cells that get rubbed off or scraped off. Um, do typically have a good nerve supply. Um, so your skin is an epithelial tissue, and um, you have very good feeling in your skin. So obviously there's good nerve supply. Okay, what holds the cells together in tissue like this? These cells in layers. What holds them together side by side? They've got the basement membrane underneath to give strength to it, but like in this epithelium like this with a bunch of layers, something's holding all these cells together like that. And so that's what's meant by the, well, these connections between cells. And there's a few types of them um, described here. Anchoring junctions says attach cell to cell or cell to basement membrane. So that would be like holding this cell to this cell and this cell to this cell. So holding all these together, but also holding this bottom layer of cells to the basement membrane. And so those anchoring junctions here, and there's a few kinds of them, desmosomes, adherents, heavy desmosomes. Don't worry about those words, but they're like stitches. Like this would be two cells side by side, and this would be the plasma membrane of the cell on the right, plasma membrane of the cell on the left. And what holds them together is like stitches, and these are just special protein molecules that are like stitches holding those cells together. Same here. Here holding it to the basement membrane. So this would be a cell up here, and the basement membrane down there. Um, Then these tight junctions, similar thing, except shown here. Again, it's like stitches. Again, two plasma membranes side by side here, and these stitches holding them together. But these are very tight stitches. I mean, these stitches are kind of loose. There's space, some little bit of space between these two cells, but these are stitched very tightly together so that liquid cannot leak in between the cells, and those tight junctions are typically in the tissue surrounding organs that contain liquid, like the urinary bladder. Is the cells of the urinary bladder. So these are cells. So these has these tight junctions holding them together so that urine can't leak out in between the cells. And then this third type called gap junctions. These are little tunnels between or connecting two cells. So again, these are plasma membranes of two cells side by side, the cell on the left and the cell on the right, and these gap junctions have little tunnels. They're just again made of protein molecules, so that stuff can pass from one cell into the other, like nutrients, like sugars. Okay, So epithelial, let's look at this again. Epithelial tissues are described, you see two words here, simple squamous, simple cuboidal, stratified cuboidal. What's that mean? The first words, simple or stratified, that just means either one layer or more than one layer. So if there's just one layer, it's called simple. If there's more than one layer, it's called stratified. The word stratified just means in layers. So these all have just one layer, so they're simple. These all have more than one layer, so they're stratified. The second word, squamous, cuboidal, columnar. So squamous just means flat. So this is simple squamous epithelium is just one layer of thin, flat cells. So we're looking at the edge view of this epithelium like a cut through it. Simple cuboidal, these are shaped like cubes or boxes. Columnar, tall and slender like a column. So just one layer of simple columnar. These have cilia. Remember, cilia are those movable fingers, finger-like projection that some kinds of cells have. So this would be what we have in our trachea. It's lined with cilia, covered with mucus. And so these are stratified. This is stratified squamous, so this is several layers of thin, flat cells. That's what our skin is, the epidermis of our skin. Several layers of thin, flat cells, so it's called stratified squamous. Stratified cuboidal, so more than one layer of kind of box-shaped. They're about as wide as they are tall, so we call them cuboidal. And then stratified columnar, more than one layer of tall, thin cells. But then there's this here, pseudo-stratified columnar. The pseudo means false. So I guess somebody decided that this kind of looks like it's stratified because these dark spots are the nucleus of each cell. The nuclei are at different levels. This one's in the middle, this one's up high, this one's down low. So maybe somebody saw this and said, it kind of looks like it's stratified because the nuclei are at different levels, but it's really not stratified. So they decided to call it pseudo-stratified, like false layers. And this one's also got cilia. So this would be lining some kind of hollow organ of the body. And yeah, we saw this already, same thing. But here it tells us where they could be located in the body. So simple squamous, this is in the lungs. The little air sacs in our lungs. So we inhale through the trachea, this tube in the neck, and then that branches into the left and right lungs, and then that branches into smaller and smaller tubes that lead to these little air sacs in our lungs. And they're surrounded by blood vessels, blood capillaries. So the air comes in, the oxygen goes from the air into the blood. But this layer of tissue here that makes up this little sac, it has to be very thin for the oxygen to easily diffuse through it. So that's where we have this one place where we have this simple squamous, very thin, one layer of cells. Simple cuboidal, that's in a lot of glands. We haven't described that yet. And simple columnar, pseudostratified, parts of the respiratory system, the uterine tubes that lead from the ovary to the uterus. You don't need to know all that. I mean, you should know something like this, that these simple squamous, that's in the lungs. The cuboidal is in glands. And that the stratified squamous, that's in the epidermis of the skin. Again, cuboidal, whether it's simple or stratified, it's usually in glands. Within this transitional, we didn't talk about this transitional type. The word transition means change, and so this type of epithelium is called transitional because it can stretch. It can stretch, and then the cells would become longer this way as it stretches. And these are in tubes or organs that contain liquid, like the urinary bladder, the urethra that leads from the urinary bladder to the outside of the body, and the ureters go from the kidneys to the urinary bladder. So these all contain urine. So we saw earlier that the connections between the cells in lining the urinary bladder, it would have those tight junctions holding them together. But this epithelium is called transitional because it can stretch without leaking. You mentioned the goblet cells. So these are cells that produce mucus. So anywhere in your body where there's mucus produced, there are goblet cells in that epithelium that produces the mucus. Okay, glands. First of all, there's two kinds of glands, exocrine and endocrine. And you should be at least realize that endocrine means hormones, right? So endocrine glands produce hormones. So these are all endocrine glands, the adrenal glands, thyroid, pituitary. The pancreas is the pancreas is on both lists, endocrine and exocrine. So these produce hormones. Exocrine glands produce something else that is not a hormone. So could be sweat, saliva, breast milk, earwax, tears. Those are all exocrine. And why the pancreas is on both lists is that the pancreas produces hormones. Anybody know what hormones? What's a hormone from the pancreas?
Insulin.
Yeah, insulin. Insulin and some others that we'll learn about later. But the pancreas also has exocrine function because it produces digestive chemicals that go into the small intestine, and that's exocrine. Those are not hormones. They're enzymes and bicarbonate. So pancreas is like two glands in one, an endocrine and an exocrine. So here's the typical structure of a gland. Different shapes here, but they all have something in common. They're all a tube lined with cuboidal epithelium, and it's these cuboidal cells that produce the stuff that gland is making. So, in this case, of the mammary gland. So these cells, this glandular cuboidal epithelium is what produces the milk into this tube, and then this would lead to the nipples. Same with the salivary gland. These cells lining this tube produce the saliva, then it is released into the oral cavity, the mouth. Mucus, these are mucus glands. So there would be goblet cells in here. Gastric glands produce, so this would be in the stomach, that produce mucus, so there would be goblet cells in there, and so on. Okay, that's just an example of a exocrine glands, the sebaceous glands. Next chapter is on the skin. We'll learn about these a little bit more. But the hair follicles have this little oil gland attached to them. So this oil or sebum comes out along the hair shaft onto the surface of the skin and hair. Okay, so that was epithelial. Connective tissues, so protection, support, binding organs together, storing fat, protect against infection, filling spaces, producing blood cells. Anyway, in connective tissues, the non-living, first of all, the epithelial tissues are mostly cells with a little bit of non-living stuff, like mostly layers of cells with just a thin basement membrane, which is not living. But in connective tissue, most of the connective tissues is mostly non-living stuff, and with some relatively few living cells in it. And in the case of connective tissue, the non-living stuff is called the extracellular matrix, the ECM. Extracellular means outside of the cells. So the cells are alive, but this stuff is not. And there are various types of cells along with the extracellular matrix. What type of cells depends on what connective tissue it is, but these fibroblasts in connective tissues, they're called fibroblasts because they make the protein fibers that make up the extracellular matrix. The word blast in anatomy means a cell that produces something. So in this case, fibroblast is a cell that produces fibers of the extracellular matrix. The extracellular matrix usually consists of protein fibers like collagen, along with some other non-living stuff called the ground substance. This is gel-like, but not necessarily gel-like. In cartilage is that rubbery tissue. So it's mostly ground substance. The rubbery stuff is the ground substance, but it has protein fibers running through it to make it stronger. And it also has just cells scattered through that rubbery extracellular matrix. The connective tissues usually have a good nerve supply, except for cartilage. Cartilage does not have very good nerve supply, and highly vascular. So lots of blood vessels, again, except cartilage and tendons and ligaments. And that's important in medicine because the fact that cartilage doesn't have a good nerve supply and doesn't have a good blood supply means that cartilage does not heal very well, right? So, if a patient has a cartilage injury, that can be really hard to heal, or it might not heal at all. Got a patient in my Anatomy 1 class who recently tore the meniscus in her knee. The meniscus is a there's cartilage at the ends of the bones at joints, but in the knees there's a separate thick pad of cartilage in between the upper leg and lower leg bones called the meniscus. And when that gets torn somehow by an injury, it can take forever to heal, or sometimes it'll never heal. And used to be when that would happen to football players a lot. Football players get hit sideways in the knee when they got their cleats stuck in the ground, and so it just crushes and splits that meniscus. And used to be when that happens, surgeon would just remove it, take the meniscus out, because it's either going to take forever to heal, that player wouldn't be able to play for next year, or else it would never heal. So they just take it out. And that player could then go back to playing football for maybe a few more years, but 10, 15 years from now, he's going to have he's going to have bone-on-bone arthritis in that knee. And but now they try better to save it, to heal, the ways of getting that meniscus to heal, but it's still really hard because it just doesn't have much blood supply to it. It's hard for it to heal. Tendons and ligaments, same thing. Takes a long time for tendons and ligaments to heal. They don't have their own good blood supply. Okay, so the fibers, the protein fibers that make up the extracellular matrix, along with the ground substance, are mostly collagen. Collagen is a very strong protein, like threads that run through a lot of tissues to give them strength. But there's also some called elastic fibers, or also called yellow fibers, and like the name tells us, these are stretchy and flexible. So these are in a lot of tissues that need to be strong, but they also need to be stretchy. And reticular fibers, the word reticular means branching. So the collagen fibers and elastin fibers, they're just kind of straight, but the reticular fibers, they're branching in all directions. So they run through a lot of tissues to add strength. Okay. There's many different kinds of connective tissues, and don't worry about these categories too much. I'm not going to ask them on an exam, but let's just look at what the different kinds of connective tissues are. So it's called connective tissue proper. I don't know where to get that term, but there's loose ones and dense ones. And whether it's loose or dense, it just refers to how much protein fibers, how much collagen fibers they have. So that in the ones that dense connective tissues, this is like tendons and ligaments. These are like ropes, and it's mostly collagen fibers packed really tight together, like ropes, to make them really strong. But the loose connective tissues, it just has fewer protein fibers running through it. So that includes areolar, adipose, reticular. Areolar and reticular, these are just kinds of connective tissues that add strength to a lot of internal organs. But the adipose, you need to know this word, that means fat. Adipose means fat, so that's fat tissue. It's made up of cells. These adipose cells are cells that are they're fat cells. They are cells that are specially designed or specially, their special function is just to contain fat. Each adipose cell has a big drop of fat in it. That takes up most of the cell. So adipose tissue is what we all have right below our skin. There's a called subcutaneous fat, which means below the skin. And we also have adipose tissue in several other parts of our body that it just fills in spaces in between some organs. Some organs like the um, adrenal glands are covered with a little layer of fat that makes it look kind of fatty and lumpy on the surface. Well, let's look at these a little bit more. See some pictures. So dense regular. So it says parallel fibers. That means the fibers all running in the same direction, side by side. So tendons, ligaments, vocal cords. So these are very strong tissues like ropes. And well, yeah. So this would be looking at something like a ligament or tendon under a microscope. So this is all mostly collagen fibers, very strong. So it's fibroblasts. These are the cells that make the fibers, and so they're just scattered throughout. So that's dense regular. Regular means fibers all running in the same direction. Dense irregular. This has, it's also mostly collagen fibers, but the fibers are running this way and even this way. And so running in all directions in 3 dimensions. And adipose, adipose is one that you need to know what it looks like under a microscope. It'll be on this will be on the lab practical for sure, because no other tissue looks like this under a microscope. So this is just a drawing or diagram, but this is an actual photograph of it. To me, this looks like chicken wire. It just looks like wire, you know. But all this white, this is where the fat is. And all the organelles, the nucleus and everything, they're just squished up against the plasma membrane because of all that fat in there. This reticular, again, it's made up of reticular fibers, so these protein fibers that are just branching in all directions. Yeah, areolar kind of looks similar to reticular. So what else? What did we skip? Oh yeah, so this dense irregular, this stuff, it says it's in the dermis of the skin and the walls of arteries to add strength, to hold them together. Okay, let's go back to this chart. So the supportives, that includes cartilage and bone. So let's look at those. So bone, we'll do a whole chapter on, or 3 chapters on the skeletal system, so we'll talk more about this later, but the bone tissue is mostly the hard white mineral that's mostly calcium and phosphorus, and that stuff is called hydroxyapatite. So that's the ground substance, and there are also a lot of collagen fibers running through it to add strength. So these two together make the ground substance, and the collagen fibers make up the extracellular extracellular matrix of bone tissue, the non-living part. But there's also bone cells scattered throughout the bone tissue that we'll learn about them in the next chapter. Because bone has a good blood supply, so if you break a bone, it's amazing how fast that can heal. Break a big bone like this femur, completely break it in half, and it'll be healed back solid in 6 weeks. Because it has a good nerve supply and blood supply to deliver the nutrients to rebuild that bone tissue. What's the fastest growing tissue in any animal? Any guesses? It's not in humans. Don't have it. Not quite. Not really. It's in a mammal, and there's a species of mammal that in the Carolinas that has this kind of tissue. Maybe 2 species. Any guesses? What's something that grows really fast on an animal? Tail? No, it's at the other end. It's on the head. It's big. No. Above the head. Antlers. Deer antlers. Deer antlers. So what are they made of? Deer antlers. What kind of tissue is that? That's why I said humans don't grow antlers, but antlers are solid bone, but they grow really fast. I mean, the deer, these white-tailed deer that live in the Carolinas, the males grow a new pair of antlers every year, and they fall off to grow a new one. And but that's a lot of bone tissue to grow in just a few months, and they can grow as much as an inch of length in a day. They've got good blood supply delivering nutrients for that growth, but they have to have really good nutrition. You have to eat a lot to get all that calcium and phosphorus to build all that bone tissue every year. Okay, so that's bone and cartilage. That's the rubbery stuff, rubbery tissue. That's for cushioning and padding and making. It's a slippery material, so it's good. We have it at the end of bones at joints, so that when the joints move, the bones slide past each other easily. Again, it's mostly non-living rubbery stuff. That rubbery stuff, the ground substance is called mostly chondroitin sulfate. And it has collagen and elastic protein fibers running through it for strength and flexibility. This stuff you can buy in pills. Chondroitin sulfate. People with arthritis buy this stuff and take these pills, because the thinking is that if you take pills made of this stuff, that your cartilage is made of it, it's going to help you regrow that cartilage back and heal your arthritis or prevent arthritis getting worse. It's not really been proven to work. Some doctors say, yeah, it's worth a try. Others say, don't waste your money. It won't help. But I think billions of dollars a year are spent buying this stuff on people with arthritis. They'll try anything. Cartilage has its own cells in it called chondrocytes. Cyte means cell. Chondro means cartilage. If you see chondro in a word, it tells you it has something to do with cartilage. Right? Again, doesn't have blood vessels running through it, so it doesn't heal well. Okay, three types of cartilage: hyaline, fibro, and elastic. Um, uh, hyaline is that's the kind that's at the end of the bones, covering the ends of bones to make them slippery. It's called articular cartilage. The end of the nose, the soft part of the nose, and some of the respiratory passages, uh, like you can feel your trachea, this big airway in front of your neck. You can feel that it has rings of cartilage around it to keep it from collapsing, so that the air can flow through it. Um, it says embryo skeleton. We'll talk more about that in bone chapter, but the human skeleton starts out made of cartilage. It's not, and so the embryo skeleton is made of cartilage, not bone. But later the cartilage hardens or is replaced by bone. Um, Fibrocartilage. This is has a lot of, like the name says, fibro. It has a lot of protein fibers in it to make it especially strong. So we have this in the discs between the backbones, intervertebral discs, and also here um, here in the front of the left and right hip bones are held together by there's a thin layer, a thin strip of cartilage in there that kind of glues them together. Um, and that's a little bit flexible, so it allows the hips to flex during childbirth, so the baby can pass through the birth canal. I just learned something last semester. A student in anatomy 2 class, they had to each do a presentation, and she did a presentation on something called a symphysiotomy. This is called the pubic symphysis. So cutting this thing in half is called a symphysiotomy. And I think this started in around the year 1800 or something, a long time ago. Some doctor started doing that for difficult childbirth and just cut that in half, just to separate the left and right hips. It would not, it's cartilage, it doesn't heal very well. So some of those women who had that done, they never recovered from that. It was a terrible procedure. But this doctor, one of the doctors who was doing this, he invented a cutting tool to cut that, and it was actually a hand crank chainsaw. That was the first chainsaw. It didn't have a motor; it was a hand crank, and they were so expensive that hardly any doctors could afford to buy one. But that tool was evolved into the chainsaw that's used for cutting down trees. Yeah. Okay, then the elastic. Yeah, the meniscus pads and the knee joints I was talking about earlier. Those are just. So it's very strong and absorbs impact. Like if you fall on your butt, all those intervertebral discs in your back will absorb that. Um, uh, when you jump, land on your knees, those meniscus pads absorb that impact. And then the elastic kind of cartilage. So in the epiglottis that we swallow through, the auditory tubes inside the ears. Those are the tubes in there that lead, or they go from the middle ear to the um, the pharynx, the upper throat. And those are the tubes that a lot of little kids have troubles with, and they have to have surgery on them. And also the external ear, this part is made of that elastic cartilage. Okay, so this cartilage under a microscope, the different kinds. So this is all that rubbery stuff here. And then there's, can't see really the protein fibers running through it. But these are the little cells, chondrocytes. This word lacunae just means little pockets, little hollow spaces where those cells live. Okay, fluid connective tissue. So let's back this chart. So blood and lymph. So we'll do a whole chapter on blood later, but blood has living cells, red blood cells that carry oxygen, white blood cells of the immune system, and these platelets they're not really cells, it's a cell fragment. So it's just like a plasma membrane with a little drop of liquid inside of it, and they're not alive. They don't do anything unless you start bleeding, and they form a plug. It's called a platelet plug. They get sticky to help stop the bleeding. And that's different from the clotting that happens. So you have this platelet plug along with the clotting to help stop the bleeding. But the extracellular matrix, the non-living part, is the blood plasma. That's the liquid part of the blood. But the lymph or lymphatic fluid, this is the fluid that is in our tissues. Our cells of our tissues are surrounded by liquid. It was just called a tissue fluid, and that tissue fluid comes from it's really just blood plasma that leaks out of your blood vessels, and that's normal. We always have a little bit of that plasma leaking out of our blood capillaries into the tissues, and then that becomes the tissue fluid. But we don't accumulate too much of that tissue fluid because it is taken up or absorbed by these lymphatic vessels. So that's a separate set of tubes in addition to the blood vessels. And all the lymphatic vessels, their job is to absorb excess tissue fluid and take it away. So once that tissue fluid gets into the lymphatic vessels, it's called lymph. And those lymphatic vessels, they all lead to the shoulders where that lymph fluid is returned back into the blood. So the lymphatic vessels connect to some veins in the shoulders and put that lymph back into the blood. We'll do a chapter on that too. So this is a blood smear. You see this, you should immediately know what it is. No other tissue looks like that. These round red or pink they have a white spot in the middle because they're flat. They're thin and flat and thinner in the middle. That's why we see the more light coming through the center, and it looks like a white spot. These white blood cells look different. They're bigger, and these red blood cells, something's missing. Other cells have a dark spot called a nucleus. These don't have a nucleus. But the white blood cells, that's this odd, weird shaped blob on these, that's the nucleus. And there's several different kinds of white blood cells, and one way of telling them apart, telling which kind of white blood cell it is the shape of the nucleus. This nucleus doesn't look like that one. This one doesn't look like that one. But they're all white blood cells, just different kinds. And they're called white blood cells, so why are they this color? It's because when these blood smears are made, they usually add some dye or stain to make the nucleus more visible. If they didn't do it, it wouldn't be this dark blue or whatever that is color. And the platelets are the little tiny ones. So In blood, there's way more red blood cells than white blood cells. Um, and white blood cells are bigger. The platelets are much smaller. Um, there's more platelets than white blood cells, but fewer platelets than red blood cells. These words, erythrocyte, leukocytes, those are just other words for red blood cell and white blood cell. Okay, muscle tissue. We'll do 2 chapters on muscles later. Um, so we'll just look at a little bit of this information about muscles. First of all, muscle cells are called fibers. So a muscle fiber is a cell. And they're called that because muscle cells are very long, like fibers. But this is confusing because we've been talking about collagen fibers and elastin fibers and reticular fibers. Those are non-living protein molecules made up of protein molecules. This same word, but we're using it for a living cell. And that same word fiber is also used to refer to the long part of a nerve cell. So it's kind of confusing, these word fibers. They have different meanings in different contexts. So what muscles can do that other tissues cannot do is they can contract or get shorter and produce a pulling force. 3 types of three types of muscle tissue: skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. And these 2 tell us where they are. The skeletal muscles are ones that are attached to our bones, and they're the ones that make our joints bend or straighten or twist. And cardiac means what? Heart. So cardiac muscle is only in the heart, and it makes up most of the heart. The heart is a big hollow muscle, a pump. It's actually 2 pumps, a left one and a right one. And the cardiac muscle contracts, and that pumps the blood out of the heart through the arteries. Smooth muscle is in many other internal organs and also blood vessels. Many blood vessels are surrounded by their own muscle, and so that allows blood vessels to constrict or dilate, and organs like the stomach, intestines, they can that muscle can contract. Like when we eat food, it fills up our stomach and it stays in there for a few hours, and then it moves on into the small intestine. How does it get from the stomach into the small intestine? The smooth muscle around the stomach contracts and squeezes it along into the small intestine. And that small intestine is something like 18 or 20 feet long, and that food mixed with digestive chemicals makes its way all the way through that long small intestine by the smooth muscles surrounding that tube, contracting and pushing it along through there. We got a table comparing, well, let's look at these micrographs. So skeletal muscle, these are the ones that are that make our bones move. So these muscle cells or fibers, they're very long, like spaghetti. In fact, the muscle, like this biceps muscle, it's just a bundle of these long muscle fibers, and each muscle fiber runs the whole length of that muscle. So each cell in there is like 6 or 8 inches long in there. It's hard to tell. You can barely see these lines, little faint lines across here. Those are called striations, And so this, we say that skeletal muscle is striated because it has those lines across it. Cardiac muscle here, it's hard to tell. It's pretty blurry, but cardiac muscle, they're also long fibers, but they're not just long and straight like skeletal muscle. They're branched. So each one of those muscle fibers it's like something like this, branched at the ends. And then this would be attached to the next muscle fiber that would be branched somehow. And this is also striated. I can't really see any striations, but it is striated. So skeletal and cardiac muscle are striated. Smooth muscle is not striated. That's why it's called smooth, because it doesn't have those lines across it. And it's hard to tell what these muscle fibers are shaped like, but they're described as spindle shaped. It just means they're long and they're pointed at the ends. So these, what we're seeing, these dark spots are the nucleus of each of those smooth muscle fibers. That's nucleus, nucleus, nucleus. But these, they have, each skeletal muscle fiber has several nuclei. So all these little spots here, each one is a nucleus, because these muscle fibers start out in an embryo and fetus. They start out as a bunch of, as several cells linked together end to end, and each one had a nucleus. But then they just fused into one long cell, and it still has all those nuclei in it. So skeletal and cardiac are striated. Skeletal has multiple nuclei. Smooth and cardiac has only one nucleus per muscle fiber. Another difference is there's only one kind of organ in your body that is voluntarily controlled. What is that? What can you decide in your brain you're going to make it do something, and then it'll happen? Only one kind of organ or tissue. Can you decide I'm going to speed up my heart rate? Can you do that? I can't. Can you say I think that food's been in my stomach long enough. I'm going to make my stomach contract and push that food into my small intestine. Can't do that. But I can do this. I can say, I'm going to bend my elbow and do that. So the skeletal muscle is the only part of your body that you can voluntarily control. And so this is voluntary, involuntary, involuntary. So think about that. There's no other body part that you can control except your skeletal muscles. What about breathing? You can breathe. If I decide I'm going to breathe faster, I can do that. But how do I breathe? With skeletal muscles. We have muscles that make your lungs inhale and exhale. But remember that, because that'll come up again when we do the nervous system. That skeletal muscle is the only voluntarily controlled parts of your body. Okay, another thing that cardiac muscle has, and it's hard to see on this, but where these cardiac muscles are connected together end to end like this, the dark line that in a good picture, a good micrograph, you can see dark lines. That might be one there or there, but those are called intercalated discs. Is that word on here? I guess not. When we do it, we'll do a whole chapter on the heart. Okay, so that's muscle and nervous. We're doing a few chapters on nervous tissue. So not a lot we need to say about it right now, but it's for communication between different parts of the body by nerve impulses. So different parts of your body send nerve impulses to your brain to tell your brain what's going on in different parts of your body, and your brain sends nerve impulses out to different parts of your bodies, telling those different organs what to do. Um, uh, two two main types of cells of the nervous system. Neurons, those are the nerve cells that conduct nerve impulses, the ones that do the communicating. But these other ones called neuroglia or glial cells, these are helpers for neurons. And there's six different kinds of these neuroglia, and we'll see what the different kinds are and what exactly they do when we study nervous system. Um, but there's way more neuroglia cells than there are neurons, and we have billions of neurons. So the neuroglia are very important. So here's a diagram of a nerve, of a neuron, a nerve cell. So this part is called the cell body here. That's where the nucleus and other organelles are. And there are all these branches called dendrites. This dendra is Latin for tree. Dendrology is the study of trees. So these look like tree branches, so they're called dendrites. And then there's usually one long extension, and this thing can be a couple of feet long. So these can be very long cells. And this is called an axon. And it has branches, usually has branches at the end of it. But this is where the nerve impulses are. They start here, and nerve impulses go lightning fast along that axon. So it's like this neuron is sending a message along this axon in the form of a nerve impulse. And then whatever is connected down here will get that message. So this could be another neuron. Or this could be connected to an organ or tissues of your body telling it to do something. And these dendrites are for receiving information from that neuron. So each one of these dendrites is connected to something. Some of these could be connected to the axons of other neurons, or they could be conducted into like touch receptors in your skin or some kind of receptors that are stimulated and then send a message into the cell body. So the cell body is always getting a bunch of information through its dendrites, receiving information, and then it uses that information in here to decide when it should send its own nerve impulse out. So some of these messages would be telling it, send a message now. Others are telling it, don't send a message now. So it's constantly integrating or combining all that information, deciding either I won't send one or I will send one. And if I do send a message, how strong a message should that be? If it's a strong message, it'll send maybe 100 nerve impulses per second. Or if it's a weak message, it'll send just one per second. Under a microscope, and I'll put some under a microscope later, but they don't look like this. You don't see all these parts. This is very blurry, but it looks to me, a neuron under a microscope, it looks to me like a kite. A kite, like you fly a kite that you fly in the sky. It looks kind of like that, with a axon on it, and maybe you can see the nucleus. I usually can't see any more detail than that under a microscope. Okay, where are we? Almost done? Yeah, I want to take a break in a minute. Okay, I don't know, just a little more information about tissue injury. This word inflammation, we all know, have some idea what that means, but it's inflammation. You know, we think of it as a bad thing, but it's actually part of the healing process by the immune system. Um, when you get an injury or an infection, the immune system responds by um, increased blood flow to the area. That helps with the healing, and so that's what makes it feel red, look red, and feel hot. Um, um, the blood vessels become leaky, so blood vessels allow more fluid to leak out into the tissues. That's what causes the swelling, and so there's a purpose for that. Adding more tissue fluid surrounding the cells makes it easier for white blood cells to like swim to the injury, get to the injury, um, to start fighting off the infection. And also, white blood cells will leave the blood and go out into the tissues to fight the infection, to find bacteria or viruses uh, that need to be um, killed and destroyed. Uh, we'll talk more about this when we do the immune system chapter. This word necrosis means the death of tissues because of injury or infection or something. Could be lack of blood supply. Um, the heart attack is a type of necrosis. Part of the heart muscle dies because the blood supply is interrupted by the carotid arteries are clogged or something. Um, uh, Word apoptosis. Um, Says normal cell death. So some cells are just genetically programmed to only live a certain amount of time, and then they die, just automatically die, like red blood cells. After about 120 days, they just die. Um, they just, and that's a type of apoptosis. There's even a kind of apoptosis called cell suicide. Cells can commit suicide sometimes. So, um, uh, um, cells have a, uh, a system of what we call checkpoints. So cells are always doing stuff. They're dividing, um, and when they divide, we learned in the last chapter that before a cell divides, it copies all of its chromosomes so that there will be enough chromosomes for the two daughter cells. But what if the cell makes a mistake copying a chromosome? That's what we call a mutation, genetic mutation. Now there's gonna one of the genes in that cell is gonna be wrong, and when that cell goes to do something do something with the information in that gene, it's going to get it wrong. If it makes a protein, that protein is going to turn out wrong. Um, so, or what if a cell becomes cancerous? Um, your cells are pretty smart. They notice if they make a mistake. They check after they copy a chromosome. They check to make sure they match. And if you don't match, they'll try to fix that mistake. If a cell starts to become cancerous, the cell will notice that. Um, but if a cell can't fix a mistake or it becomes cancerous, it will often just kill itself, commit suicide, for the betterment of the rest of your body. Certain cells will just sacrifice themselves. Because if they don't, if that cancerous cell doesn't do that, now it'll divide, and now there's two cancer cells. Those will divide, now there's four, and before you know it, you got cancer. It doesn't always work because people do get cancer, but many of us get cancer during our lives, get cancerous cells, but they kill themselves before we even know it. They commit this kind of suicide apoptosis. Okay, you probably know that when you're very young, you heal better and without scars. There's some infants who have surgery, and by the time they grow up, there's no scar. It just completely disappears. Um, you get to be my age, it takes longer for get injured easier, and it takes longer to heal. Um, uh, okay, just a cut, a cut heals, and we'll probably see this again in the next chapter on skin. But if there's a cut, at first it fills with blood, and then these fibroblasts. Remember, those are the connective tissue cells that make collagen fibers. Then fibroblasts will move to the area, the location of that cut, and they'll fill in the cut with collagen fibers. Um, to hold the tissues together there, and then the skin will heal over that, but you can still see the scar through the skin because that collagen stays there forever. That's a scar, and so that's why it's better if you get a cut to close it with sutures or suture strips, steri strips or something, because then there will be less collagen. There won't be a big gaping cut to fill in with collagen, and so there'll be less of a scar later after it heals. Okay, let's take a break. And I'll go get the graded exams in case you want them, and we'll, I don't know, do some lab stuff maybe. The exams are here if you want to pick yours up. The grades are on the back. Help yourself. If you don't want them, that's okay. I recommend that you look at them because I sometimes, and I probably will do this on the next exam. I might put some questions from this exam on there for extra credit at the end or something. So I recommend you look at those, see what you missed, and review that stuff again. Not there? They're alphabetical. Is Megan not here? Yes. Okay. Well, we're a little behind schedule, so and days like this, I didn't feel like coming back after break. I'm just tired, but so we got a little bit of lab stuff to do, but we should at least start on this chapter a little bit because this is what we're supposed to be doing today. Let's just maybe do 10 or 15 minutes on this chapter. And then spend the rest of the time doing lab stuff. So skin, integument means skin. Cutaneous also means skin. So it's the largest organ of the body. That means if we take your skin off and weigh it, it would weigh more than any other organ. What's the largest internal organ? Brain? No. Intestines? That's the longest, but it's not the largest. What's a little bit above that? Above that? Below that? It's right here. Above the stomach, below the lungs and heart. What is that? Right below the diaphragm? What? Liver. Yeah, liver. Liver is the largest internal organ. Okay, dermatology, of course, is a medical specialty of skin. So, the skin can be divided into two sets of layers. Or the epidermis is the outer part, and the epidermis, that's what the stratified squamous, many layers of thin flat cells. But below that, the dermis, which is thicker than the epidermis, that's not made up of layers of skin cells. That's where there's some blood vessels and nerves and hair follicles and sweat glands and the sebaceous or oil glands. That's all down in the dermis. Below the skin is the subcutaneous or hypodermis. Either of those terms mean below the skin. And that's not considered to be part of the skin. It's below. So it's between the skin and what's below the skin, which is, much of your body is the muscles. So you got skin, then the subcutaneous layer, and then the muscles. Subcutaneous is where we have a layer of fat or adipose. So here's a diagram of a section of skin. We got some models. Where's that thing? Right back there. There's a model of skin that looks much like this diagram, but it's a three-dimensional model. So this shows the up here is the epidermis. It doesn't show that this is layers. This is several layers of skin cells. And then all this down here is the dermis. So the dermis is thicker than the epidermis, and the where they meet is this wavy surface or boundary. So this is all just thin flat cells, but down here in the dermis, this is where there's a lot of other stuff. This is a sweat gland. It has a tube leading up through the epidermis to the surface where the sweat spills out. This would be a hair follicle, so where the hair grows, it grows down here and then it just pushes out through the epidermis. And attached to the hair follicle is this oil gland, sebaceous gland. So the oil comes out along the hair shaft onto the surface of the skin. All this lumpy stuff, this is fat tissue, adipose. And there's more of that adipose tissue down here in the subcutaneous. Also attached to a hair follicle, there's this. This is a muscle. Every hair follicle has a little tiny muscle attached to it, and that's called an erector pili muscle. That's smooth muscle, which means it's involuntary, but that muscle makes the hair when that muscle contracts, it makes the hair stand up on end. And that's not important in humans, but that's what goosebumps are. When that muscle contracts, it makes the hair stand up on end, and that happens when we're cold sometimes, or when we're under certain kinds of stress, or sexual arousal causes that to happen. And that doesn't have any important function in humans, but in other animals, or maybe in our ancestors who were covered with hair, their whole bodies, that it's important. And in birds, their feathers do the same thing. In cold weather, the hair on an animal, or the feathers, they instead of lying down, it'll stand up straight, and that makes a thicker layer of insulation. Same in birds. You'd probably notice in the wintertime on a cold day, you see birds, they look like they're all fluffed up like a ball because their feathers are standing up on end because they're erector pili muscles. And animals like domestic dogs. When a domestic dog is stressed or angry, what happens? The hair on its back stands up. That's these erector pili muscles. That means if your neighbor's pit bull is doing that, it's not a good time to pet that. Try to pet him. What else? Also down here, these things, it's a Pacinian corpuscle. That's a touch receptor. Um, so when there's anything touches the skin, the pressure will trigger this receptor to send a nerve impulse. This will be a neuron. Send a nerve impulse to the brain. Tell your brain something's touching the skin at the location of this receptor. Um, um, okay, what else? Oh yeah, the epidermis. Most of the epidermis on your skin is what we call thin skin, but in just on the palms of your hands and the bottoms of your feet, the skin is called thick skin. It has extra layers of skin cells that the rest of your um, skin does not have. Also, the thick skin does not have sebaceous glands. It doesn't have hair follicles. So I don't know of anybody who has hair from the palms of their hands or the bottoms of their feet. And those sebaceous glands, the oil glands, are only where there are hair follicles. So we don't have them on the palms of our hands or soles of our feet either. Okay, so here's a diagram of epidermis. Um, so, so a bunch of layers of skin cells, and this is considered to be stratified squamous because even though at the bottom layers, these are not thin and flat. These are pretty tall, but at the top there's thin, and because the top ones are thin and flat, this is described as stratified squamous, even though not all of it is squamous. So all these cells are called these cells of the epidermis are called keratinocytes. Remember, keratin is that protein that hair and fingernails are made out of, and we also have keratin in the cells of our epidermis. That's why they're called keratinocytes, because these they fill up with keratin, and they also have melanin in them. Melanin is a brown pigment or brown color that is produced by cells called melanocytes. Remember, cyte means cell. So this is at the bottom, in the bottom layer of the epidermis, there are these melanocytes that produce the brown pigment and add that into the cells to the epidermal cells to add brownish color to them. So this says light skin and dark skin. So dark skin, it just has more melanin, more of that melanin pigment produced by these melanocytes. And that's a good thing, because that melanin is what filters the ultraviolet radiation from the sun, which causes skin cancer. That's why light-colored people are more likely to get skin cancer than darker-skinned people. Okay. Also tactile cells. In the epidermis, there are some, are they shown here? Not shown, but there are some cells, some touch receptors. We know there's touch receptors down in the dermis, but there are some in the epidermis too, near the bottom. You got another picture? Yeah. This is another picture of the epidermis. So here's at the bottom, there's a melanocyte. And this is a touch receptor, this Merkel cell. It's in the epidermis, but then it has a neuron attached to it leading to the brain. So if this skin is touched or poked or something, it'll trigger this to send a nerve impulse to the brain. Just like these Pacinian corpuscles, same thing. It's just a touch receptor or pressure receptor um, that tells your brain that there's something in contact with the skin there. So this word tactile just means touch, or touch or feel, a sense of touch. And so the melanin gives our skin the brownish color, and the suntan is just stimulates your skin, your melanocytes, to produce more melanin because it's like your skin protecting itself. You're exposed to a lot of sun, your skin is going to say, better produce more melanin to protect myself from that ultraviolet. So it'll produce more melanin to filter out. So that's why we get suntan if we're out in the sun a lot. There's another pigment, another color that affects our skin called keratin. And it's a yellow-orange color. And that's not produced by the skin itself, but it's in some foods that we eat. What kind of food can you think of that has this yellow-orange color that could affect the color of your skin if you eat a lot of it? Anybody know? I mean, look at the word. Carrots. Carrots. So carrots have a lot of keratin. And I don't know if it's true, but I mean, I eat a lot of carrots. I'm vegetarian, eat a lot of carrots, but I don't know if it makes my skin orange. I've heard that it does. Maybe I don't eat enough of it. But, okay, what else about the epidermis? Oh yeah, this. So the epidermis is made up of many layers of skin cells, and they're thicker at the bottom. They get thinner toward the top, but these layers can be divided up into 5 sets of layers, and they have these names. Then that stratum means layer. So the top one is stratum corneum. The one below that, the stratum lucidum. This one is only in thick skin on the palms of the hands and the bottoms of the feet. Everywhere else in your skin, you don't have these layers. You just have the other 4. But then granulosum, spinosum, basale. So the stratum basale, that's at the base. Basale is Latin for the base or the bottom. So this is the bottom layer of the epidermis. Below this is dermis. So these are the cells that are always dividing, because these cells at the top, you can see they're always flaking off, falling off, rubbing off. So why don't we run out of skin cells? It's because down here at the bottom, these cells are always dividing to make more skin cells, and then they just work their way up through the layers, and so these cells will become, after a while, they'll move up and they'll become spinosum cells, and then they'll become granulosum, and then corneum, and then they'll flake off. But there's always more being made below them to replace them. And you see so as they move up, they are accumulating more keratin protein in them, and they get thinner and flatter, and eventually they die. So this stratum corneum, these are dead cells. They're just like little flat packets of keratin by that point. Nothing going on inside of them. And they're just like protecting the layers below, but they rub off easily. This stratum granulosum, this name comes from this layer produces the lamellar granules, and these are just little granules of oily or fatty type of stuff that adds some waterproofing to the skin. Okay, so this is an actual micrograph taken under a microscope. Can't see the stuff nearly as well as in these nice diagrams, these drawings. Um, okay, don't worry about this papillary and reticular layers of the dermis. Um, but this word papilla means bumps. You should know that word. In anatomy, if you see the word papilla, it means bumps, just a bump. Um, um, if we do this, dissect the fetal pigs later this semester, you'll find that the nipples of a fetal pig are referred to as mammary papillae, it's mammary bumps. Um, so the so this is the dermis. The upper part is called the papillary, below the lower part is the reticular, and that's just because the upper part, that's where this has this wavy boundary between the dermis and the epidermis, and each of these waves is called a papilla, a bump. And then down here, there's a lot of that reticular protein fibers, so it's called reticular layer. Um, but this is down here is where there's blood vessels, nerves, hair follicles, touch receptors, sweat glands, oil glands. Okay, accessory structures of the skin. So this is just other structures in the skin, other besides the skin itself. So hair, fingernails, toenails, and the few different kinds of glands. So hair, we don't need to say a whole lot about that. Just the follicle is down here in the dermis. So the hair is growing down here, and then it just pushes out through through this pore, through the epidermis. There's that erect appealing muscle, sebaceous gland attached. The hair itself is called the shaft. And the sebaceous glands or oil glands, that oily stuff is called sebum. So this is normal, that it adds some waterproofness to your skin and hair. Soap companies and shampoo companies tell us we gotta always be washing that stuff off, but it's actually normal. It's part of our physiology. Okay, and then sweat glands. There's two kinds of sweat glands, eccrine and apocrine. The eccrine type is what produces most of the watery sweat that happens when you feel hot, and so the water in the sweat evaporates, and that's what cools us down. That's why we sweat that way. And it's also for excretion. Excretion means just getting rid of stuff, waste products in our body. So there's a lot of stuff in your sweat that is also in urine. Like there's salt and urea in sweat. So it's a way of getting rid of some of that excess stuff that we have in our bodies. And the eccrine sweat glands have their own antibacterial enzymes in them to prevent bacteria growing in that sweat, because bacteria will grow anywhere that there's something to eat, like your skin and moisture. So we have natural antibiotics or antibacterial stuff on our skin, but it's not 100% effective, because if people who don't bathe very often, that bacteria will grow and that'll cause body odor after a while. But then there's apocrine sweat glands. These are not for cooling. These are This is a different kind of sweat that's only in a few parts of the body, um, armpits, nipples, genitals, eyelids, ears. Um, and this is not, this sweat is not, does not happen in response to, oh, being hot. It's usually emotional stress, sexual arousal, and it has its own smell. This is not the body odor that happens from this kind of sweat if you don't bathe for a while. Um, this sweat has its own smell, and it's and it varies from person to person. And it says I got pheromones question mark in because pheromones are in animals. A pheromone is some kind of um, odor that's emitted by an animal to attract other animals or to send some kind of message to other animals. And so so if a female dog is what we call in heat, that means she's receptive to uh, sex. Um, she will emit pheromones, and so male dogs from a long distance away, they can smell that, and that's what attracts them. But question mark, do you think humans do that? Think humans have pheromones? Are you think that there are some men who there's just the smell on them just really is really attractive? Um, some people say yes, some say not so, or not as much as in other animals. But um, okay, let's stop here. Need a I didn't mean to even talk this long, but so for lab activity, I got a handout. It's just a worksheet about tissues, and um, yeah, this will be really helpful for you to work through this to prepare for the next lecture exam. These are pretty good questions. Um, So I want you to work on this, but you can take this home with you or work on it in here today. Um, but you got to do something. I want everybody to don't just be on their tablet doing buying shoes or something. You got to do this, and I'm going to get some microscopes set up. I got some tissue slides out, and so if some of you want to help me set up microscopes and get slides on them and focus so that I want everybody to look at each one of these slides and see what this stuff looks like. If we could start up the an image if somebody wants to play with that. There's all kinds of stuff. I'm sure there's stuff about tissues in there. If somebody wanted to try to find some good tissue images in here, anybody want to do that? Play with the Oh, yeah. Yeah, we need to check our osmosis experiment. Yeah, that's still up there. You can, you want to let it out, it's still not. So there's a on-off switch down here. Here next to the port. On, and in this switch, just to turn on the built-in computer, so you just click it one time, and then do this switch, and this should come on. We'll take this over there. to play with this. Um, Welcome to do that. Um, Somewhere in here, you just open folders and find it, but somewhere in here there's just a huge list of stuff. There's stuff in here, chemistry and physics and all kinds of biology stuff. So in here. Here's some of this. Just help us out and see what we can find. Having to do with tissues. Somebody want to help set up some microscope slides? Okay. So, here's a that I'd like to set up. Here it goes. So we need to just plug these in and turn on the lights. And any more volunteers to help set up microscopes? You good, Pat? So we made a list there of one. I'd like to get one of each of those slides.
This one's
I'm on that paper. Here's the good, setting up those slides. That muscle slide doesn't look much like the pictures in. Who did that? Did you keep the muscles?
What, the human?
The three muscle tissue types, or did you do that? The three muscles. It doesn't look very, it's not very good slide. I can't, it doesn't look anybody without the picture in the book.
The adipose one does, like
Yeah.
the picture that you showed.
Yeah, that one looks good.
Stratifies.
Okay, everybody should look at each one of these microscopes, because this is the kind of stuff that's gonna be on the lab practical, so I would recommend you even make some sketches, because it's, what you see in the microscope doesn't look just like the pictures in the book, so students often make the mistake of, they think they don't have to do the lab work, they can just look at pictures in the book, but it's not the same. Skin? Ratified wings? Transition. There's good images on the anatomy of tissues too. We got skin shown here with, so you've got it, so it's got lines separating with different layers of the epidermis.
Maybe we use this.
Well, you can follow it. Yeah, I'm not aggressive. Just, I don't know. I don't know.
We don't need it.
I'm just trying to get the data on that. That's good.
I did that before. I put it on. Oh, you can understand what is this and that. What did you put? Show me the report. Maybe it's not on this one. I just thought it was on the other one.
I'm going to have a meditation that is on the phone. I do. There. That's all I'm going to post and I'll do it.
Yeah, I will release it on. But, yeah, they have one in Sanford, there's one in, one in Fayetteville and one in Austin, but the ones in Fayetteville and Austin are not accredited schools. And there's gonna be a lot of complications with trying to take the exam. That's what Miss Green was telling me. She said then you have to do all this extra work afterwards to get to that point, and it's just not worth it. What are we on here? Good. Oh, I just needed her class. No. I'll work on the flow one day. I was gonna say I broke it. This is the one that I think was off to me. So this was two different pages. They both said I'm good. Well, this thing is full much more than holiday.
We got 10 minutes, so you guys can start hacking out for this. Or if you want to stick around longer, keep the lab open, and we'll have some meeting.
Have a good weekend. Happy Valentine's Day.
Are you gonna look at the microscope?
Have you used those things?
Back to this one. Because, where is it? I have this one too. I also have this one, so this all broke and good. And I'll help you clean up when I finish taking photos. I have this one in the bag. One of the ladies. Is that everything?
There's a light on there?
They're not fun.
Did you look at those?
Yes. Good weekend.
Fine.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Thanks. Too.